We are going to get started. Welcome, everybody from Cincinnati, Ohio, and State College of Pennsylvania. This is BWF's Next Gen Annual Giving Series, and our topic today is building a digital-first annual giving program. There's a lot of things to talk about here. It's a topic I'm very excited about. We do welcome your questions. Drop those in the Q&A. We would love to try to answer those as we go. Some of them we'll save at the end. Some of them we'll do along the road here. And once you're at it, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's nice to have you here. I'm James Barnard, Associate Managing Vice President with BWF. I lead our annual giving and digital marketing practice. BWF's a full-service fundraising consulting firm with 4 decades of innovation under our belts. Our annual giving and digital practice helps clients to meet their fundraising goals by solving the most complex of challenges. That's the easiest way I can say what we do. We really do design custom solutions and strategies that are based on the resources that you have available. We also manage campaigns, everything from print and digital campaigns, email marketing, digital engagement centers, all kinds of things. Before I joined the firm, I spent 15 years as a practitioner, most recently at the University of Cincinnati Foundation, leading the annual giving and fundraising marketing program for the academic campus and its health system. And I am joined today by my good friend and colleague, Jeff Hallett. Jeff, say hello.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Like James, a little bit of my background, I bring about 15 years of annual giving experience. Before joining BWF, I was at Penn State, which is why I'm still located in State College, PA, where I worked in the Central Annual Giving Office, overseeing digital fundraising, day of giving, crowdfunding, student philanthropy, recent graduate giving, colleges, campuses, and Penn State Health. And I'm really excited about today's conversation about digital-first annual giving. I think we have some good examples and conversation points that we're going to talk about today. And I hope that everyone gets something out of the conversation we're going to have. Just to reiterate something that James just mentioned, please share your thoughts and comments in the chat and questions in the Q&A. It's great to hear from all of you as well.
Yeah, it's great to see lots of familiar names in the chat. Keep those on coming. Always nice to see who's tuning in today, wherever you're dialing in from. Before we go any further, I think we should clear the air a little bit. Sometimes when we say digital first, we get some backlash, some pushback. We hear things like, but mail still accounts for the biggest share of our revenue, or my phone-a-thon is still important, or my least favorite objection, email doesn't work for fundraising. So I hear you loud and clear, and here's what I want to say. Digital first does not mean digital only. A digital first program is, or maybe should be, multi-channel. I really do believe that. It can include print if you want it to include print. It can have a phone strategy, absolutely. And hey, if you wanted to have a billboard, have a billboard. If that's what you think works, put that in. Digital first does not mean digital only. Jeff, what does it mean?
Well, I think it means that digital first annual giving isn't just a channel or a collection of channels. It's more of a mindset. It's how our lives are becoming more digital. Our digital lives are becoming a greater part of how we live our day-to-day. It's little things like online banking. I mean, who still owns and uses a checkbook? It's online shopping. It's how we buy groceries. We have fun. We listen to music, get the news, stay stylish, meet people and find our partners. If you look at the stats, we see a decline in in-person retail activity, just as an example. It's down from 95% of all retail was in person in a decade ago, and now it's down to 83%. That's billions of dollars. You see it in things like the growth of Amazon and Uber and DoorDash and Instacart and everything else that you see on the screen here. In our industry, it's the rise of things like Giving Tuesday and online giving more generally, which is now accounting for almost 20% of all giving. And of course, the pandemic over the last few years has pushed so much of what we do in our work and our personal lives online. And I think the challenge for us in the nonprofit world is to see what's sticking in the minds of people who want to join us on our missions. And I think the big thing for me is that we're all more distracted. We've been talking for 5-6 minutes now. I already have a couple emails, some Slack messages. I'm pretty sure the vibration on my wrist was a text message, and all of them are calling for my attention.
Speaking of Slack, one of our BWF channels was buzzing last night. Alex Oftley, one of our senior VPs, shared a chart, and I actually threw it into this slide deck kind of late. I want to share this. The chart itself is going to be no surprise to anybody, but it's landline usage, or a percentage of households that have a landline versus cell phone only. Again, not a surprise to anyone. We all kind of, this just confirms what we already knew and suspected. But it makes me think of something that I talk about quite a lot, which is I use my cell phone for everything in my life. So phone is not dead. Let's like get that out of the way. I don't think phone is dead. I use my cell phone for literally everything in my life. I shop on it. I watch Netflix and soccer matches. I take photos. My daughter spends a crazy amount of time looking at photos. She enjoys that. I text people. But you know the one thing I never do? Make phone calls. I just do not really use my phone for actually making phone calls very often. And I don't want to speak for everybody. I know that that's just me, and it's not, that's not representative of what everyone is. Call me old school if you like. I'd rather send a text message. But, I just think that while phone is far from dead, the way we use our phones has evolved. And part of that comes into why we need digital first strategies, because so much of that plays into a device that you really have with yourself all the time. And all of this is to say that over the last few years, donor expectations have changed. Our donors are looking for more personal, meaningful engagement, compelling content that really speaks to their individual interests. If you're a client of mine, you've probably seen this slide. If you've attended any presentation I've given, you've probably seen a version of this slide. I think it's critically important. That's why I always go on about it. Our donors have come to expect from us the same sorts of experience that they now expect from other brands. Whether that's a streaming service, retail, an email from Zillow reminding you to buy that house that you looked at this morning. That's the kind of experience our donors are expecting because they're getting it from every other part of their life. Salesforce had a study out a few years ago that said that 73% of consumers say that one extraordinary experience with a brand elevates their expectations for all other brands. And also that 62% of customers expect companies to adapt based on their actions and behavior. Now, that was 2019 that they did that study. So I dare say that in the last few years, those numbers have only gone up. How many of us can truly say that we're meeting that need? And I know, and I've been in this situation of people saying, well, Amazon can do this and Netflix can do that. Why can't you, small nonprofit, do this? And that's a very frustrating question to be asked. And we all can talk about, well, the billions of dollars they spend on things and the huge teams, and that's all true and that's all well and good. But it doesn't change the expectations that our donors have of us. And we have to find some ways to at least make progress in this direction.
Yeah, and I think this new reality is that 73% number where it's elevating expectations, even if you're not the one doing it. It really starts to talk about the differences between the annual giving program that we've known for decades and what their new expectations for us is. And so it's it's the phone call you get when you're sitting down to dinner versus getting the right ask at the right time through the right channel. It's the mailing from your alma mater, who should in theory know who you are, that says dear friend, versus appeals that address you the way you prefer with your correct name, title, pronouns, what have you. It's the email asking you to give to a program that you frankly didn't know existed versus asking for a fund that you have an affinity or an inclination to support. And it's the assumption that you're going to give just purely out of loyalty versus showing you impact and how you can invest and join that change. The old school program or the old school universe was, how you find out about things was by interacting with the people around you. You talk to your neighbor about what's going on in town. Now you have a world that is enhanced by algorithms that are powered by the whole of the internet, and it all sort of speaks to how people use trust in philanthropy. There are a lot of changes that are happening across our industry related to all of these aspects. And I think the good news is that many of the changes we're seeing are for the better. The question now, I think, is with limited resources and not enough hands to get everything done, how do you prioritize? What are those meaningful steps that you can take so that you can get onto that path of a digital first annual giving program and a digital first mindset. And so I think that sort of sets us up for today's conversation. And before we do get into that and get too far ahead of ourselves, we should probably take a step back and sort of review what we're hoping to accomplish. So you can see the session description on the screen, as well as our goals for the conversation. And yeah, so I think that sort of sets the stage nicely to jump in, and James, I'll turn it back over to you to sort of kick us off.
You reminded me, Jeff, of something you said the other day that I thought was really insightful about how the sort of the marketer's way of thinking in our ideal world is I create a schedule and a timeline and everything works to that timeline and very organized, and it's a project management issue. Mm-hmm. But our consumer, or our donor in this case, doesn't want things that way. They want to do it on their timeline. It's not our journey, it's their journey. We're going to talk more about that later, but I think that was a really insightful comment you made before.
Yeah.
I want to share with everybody what we call the team framework. And we're actually going to use this as our sort of guide for the conversation today. We're going to walk through this from the lens of creating a digital first annual giving program. This is a tool that we use at BWF when we're evaluating an annual giving program and when we're building a strategy. It's ultimately the four kind of pillars that we've identified that we believe create a successful annual giving strategy. This actually stemmed from a project that we did with the University of Texas at Austin, where they had this big, hairy goal of increasing donor participation by 50%, which is huge. It was another 50,000 plus donors for them. And they asked BWF to conduct a market opportunity analysis within their colleges, schools, units. They have, 26 or so CSUs within the organization, all of which they felt had these like pockets of prospective donors who all had different affiliations to the organization. And if we could just sort of meet them where they are, speak to them in the way they want to be spoken to, and engage with them how they want to be engaged, that had huge potential for engaging those individuals and getting them to become donors. So what we created was this framework that had a slightly different variation of it originally, but we created this framework where we could take that into each of the college, schools, and units and create, do this sort of quick assessment and then create this strategy based on that and the sort of different resources that were available. So what we liked about this is it's intentionally scalable. It can work just as well for a enormous organization with a 20-person annual giving team, but it also works for a very small organization with a 1-person annual giving team. And we have put this to use with many of our client projects to great effect with both of those different scenarios. So we're going to use it today as kind of our agenda. Ultimately, we're going to go through each of these sections, the T's, which is the team tools, and the tactics. We're going to go through the donor experience, the message, the audience development piece. I got those back to front. Obviously, we should have called it meta, Jeff. Did you ever think of that?
I think it would have had a different impact if we had called it that. But yeah. I think what I really like about the framework is not only does it look at these 4 different dimensions, but it also lets you really look at the top to bottom of an organization too. What I like is you have your team and the tools and the infrastructure, the people and tools you have in place. You have the experience, how are you interacting with donors and how are they interacting with you? Audience, where you're looking at the characteristics and motivations of the group of constituents, and then you bring it all together with message and the story that you're trying to tell them. And so I really like how it has allowed us to take that top to bottom, inside to out look at every organization.
Yeah. And so we're going to jump into this. We're going to get started with one of the most critical elements. That's the people, the team. And there is a reason why we start with team before we get into tools and tactics. And lately, there's been a whole lot of chatter about AI, a whole lot of buzz about ChatGPT in particular. And that tools like that can produce copy for you. Maybe we don't even need people in this fundraising work anymore. Well, here's my hot take. The best tools and tactics in the world are useless without the right team using them. I think the question is, how do you build your digital first annual giving team. And this certainly gets nuanced as we start to think about bigger and smaller teams, and it becomes a very different conversation, not to mention all the complexities of how teams are organized, what kind of support you can get from other parts of your organization or external to your organization. So there's not going to be a one size fits all solution. I think about some of our larger client partners like UT Austin, we mentioned, University of Minnesota, they actually have digital strategy teams, and they have or will eventually have specific people on those teams with very specific roles, like a web developer and an email marketing person and a paid digital person. Want to acknowledge that not everyone's like that. In fact, most of the organizations we work with don't have a multi-person digital team. Many of them don't have a digital team, period. They have an annual giving team. That may be 1, 2, 5 people. And those people are expected to be able to do some of the digital work. So I think we're sort of coming at this a little bit more from the lens of, if you are more limited on resources, which we feel like is probably the more common thing in this nonprofit world, how do you tackle that? And at the end of the day, you have to make choices with how you spend your budget, how you structure the team. And that's where this starts to become a critical piece. So how do you build out the digital first annual giving team? There's more sort of 4 guiding principles, I think, of what I would recommend you do here. First would be to seek out the digital first mindset. It doesn't matter how big or small you are. If you want to have a digital first annual giving program, this is the number one thing you're going to need to do. That is surrounding yourself with people who think this way, people who believe in digital first, are willing to learn, are willing to invest, are willing to make decisions that move you in this direction. Now, maybe you're a vice president and you describe yourself as old school and you have a hard time making Outlook work. That's cool. You do you. If that's you, you need to surround yourself with people who think differently to you, and you need to bring some people on that think about digital first, because I don't think anyone really disagrees that this is the direction the world is moving in. It's where all of our donors are living. It is their reality. It has to be our reality too. Perhaps you are an associate director, an assistant director in your team, and you are the digital person. The rest of the team has a little bit of a different, more traditional background, and you're sort of the new blood, and they're like, you're the digital person, right? Tell us how digital works. That can be a tough spot to be in. My advice there is, if you're the one driving that almost from the bottom up, surround yourself with people who think like you and who are going to be supportive of this notion. You may have to look in other areas of your organization to find that. Maybe it's marketing teams or other places, depending on what kind of organization you are. Sometimes it's about bringing people in from the outside as well. Second, when it does come to hiring, and this really ought to be the most obvious thing we say all day, but I think this often gets missed, so I want to make sure we say it out loud. The most common place we see, sorry, I didn't say it out loud. So prioritize the digital skills and experience when you are hiring. And I think the most common place I see this get overlooked is when we're hiring creative subject matter experts. We're hiring writers, designers, maybe full-time staff, but maybe freelance. And very often we don't hire people who are sort of experienced and skilled at writing for digital or designing for digital. And that is a slightly different skill to people who have more traditional design or writing backgrounds. And so if you have the opportunity to hire people and you want to create a digital first program, this is one of the first big things you're going to want to do is start hiring the right people. When you have those decisions to make, think about what that experience is you need and what skill sets you want to bring to the table. And regardless of whether or not you're hiring anybody, invest in training and professional development. This is huge. Provide ongoing training to people. This stuff doesn't just stop. Digital's not done. It's not been invented and now we move forward. This has been going on for 20 plus years. It's a constantly evolving situation. No one was talking about GPT a year or so ago, and now it's all anyone can talk about on LinkedIn, it seems. It's a constantly evolving environment. You can never stop learning. You need to, if you're a leader within your team, you need to bring this mindset that it's always time to provide that training, give people the opportunity to learn together. There are some great free and low cost options out there. Oftentimes I see these living outside of the normal kind of professional development spheres for the nonprofit sector, those sort of organizations we're used to going to for our professional development. Sometimes these digital sort of skills training comes from other places. One place in particular I suggest looking at is just LinkedIn Learning, where there's some great resources out there, and lynda.com, there's some great tools as well. So definitely invest time more than anything else in some of that digital first training. And then beyond the staff, think about internal and external partners that you can trust. Maybe that's a marketing communications team that has some expertise that you can draw from. Maybe it's if you have access to some sort of firm or agency that can provide some expertise. It's hard to do this alone, and it's easier if you can get some help from people. And depending on the size of your organization, these are the kind of things that you need to be thinking about as you think about what is the team going to look like as we move towards a digital first program.
And James mentioned tools just a second ago. Many of the tools out there are designed to make our lives easier, and certainly some do. But the question that we try to answer in our work with our clients and our colleagues that we talk with is whether the tools you have are the tools you need. Every time I talk to somebody in the annual giving world, it's how this new system is going to change the game and be the silver bullet to all of our strategic challenges. If you want to have a successful digital program, and I think this is sort of the key point in this next component of that T element of our framework, you're going to have to invest in it. These are just some of the tools that you're going to need to enable that digital first program and mindset. You're going to need a solid website with the ability to create compelling web pages and optimize your giving forms. You're going to need the visuals, the pictures, the video, the multimedia to show your story, not just tell it. You're going to need a decent email marketing tool, preferably one with the ability to automate some of those more routine, regular communications. Social media management tool to make that platform easier to manage is going to be a great idea. I also can't stress enough the importance of a project management system, or at least a project management process, to help keep things on track and provide that source of truth to what's happening. Any of these tools, I think one key point is any of these tools are only as good as how well you implement them. And so that gets me to this last tool, which is your data. The most important investment, in my opinion, is in your CRM. We just released a white paper on data governance and developing an inclusive database and engagement program. And as we were preparing for this, I was reminded of a line from that, and it's on the slide here. So I won't read the whole piece, but what I took away from this is, making sure that your constituencies and communities are being served appropriately all rolls up into and is part of having a inclusive and solid database that records all of that information. And so, notwithstanding the importance of diversity and inclusion on its own, the paper goes on to really talk about how having that inclusive database full of constituent data enables better, deeper engagement, which in the case of today is sort of synonymous with that digital first mindset that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got the team and you got the tools. And so the next thing really would be the tactics. What are you going to do with them?
Yeah, I think if there's one word that is used most frequently in conjunction with digital or digital first, it's probably multi-channel. We used it in our introduction when we started talking this afternoon. There are certainly programs that have a truly multi-channel annual giving effort, but I think that some organizations out there view different channels of communication, mail, email, phone, social, etc., as sort of distinct efforts. The messaging may be tied together across each of those, but the channels themselves do not interact. For example, how many of you out there have had a conversation like this? You have your first direct mail appeal for the fiscal year. You have the budget to send it to 10,000 people. It's a decent population. And you go through the process of planning the segments and the specific messages for each audience. And then you get to the end of the meeting and you say, and we'll send an email to everyone else who isn't getting the mailing. In this example, email is just an add-on. It's something you throw into the mix at the end of the day to make sure that everyone gets something. And I think what we're saying when we talk about digital first annual giving is recognizing that email can be a leader to your engagement strategy, that it isn't just the cheaper or lesser option to mail or some other form of communication out there. The question we like to ask, and we try to get the people that we work with to answer, is whether those budget dollars are best spent sending a mailing to those 10,000 people, or if there's a better way to allocate those dollars that increases the overall response and successfully engages the best people for that particular medium.
And sometimes, Jeff, we say this and people will say, well, what does it matter? There's no harm in sending those other 100,000 people or whatever it is an email. Maybe, but actually I think there is harm, because then we see poor open rates, poor click rates, and poor conversion rates, and we feed into this idea that email doesn't work, which is a myth. Email works incredibly well for all kinds of things in the business world, and it works very well for many organizations who have figured out how to do email fundraising, and yet so many organizations have not. And I think part of that's because they're also doing this unstrategic, sort of unintentional stuff, and then saying, well, it doesn't work. Look at our results.
Yeah, I think you see you definitely see that with email and just sort of the blast email out there with maybe some segmentation. But I think you also see that with social media and really trying to understand what the value of social media is. It's well, we post on social media, but we didn't get any giving. That's what sure. You could do targeted digital during that sort of campaign, and you can take some of those budget dollars from a smaller direct mail piece and put that into something that is going to sit in the background, generate some leads, and really get your organization in front of the right people. And James, I know you're working with a healthcare provider out there who just did something like that. Did you want to talk about them at all, or?
Sure. Yeah, so I got ahead of ourselves with the slides a second ago, so we're back on track.
That's okay.
We partnered with one of the nation's leading children's hospitals towards the end of 2022, and the idea there was to produce this digital first fundraising campaign for their year end. And they've been doing direct mail for several years and had sort of supplemented that with some email marketing and some digital advertising, but they wanted to really elevate this, and ultimately their goal was to raise more money and create a pipeline of new donors. So what we did is we developed an audience, first defining that ideal donor, and then creating a likely donor persona. Put that all into a cohesive digital strategy, where the email marketing was much more prominent. We had a very significant paid advertising component to that as well in the sort of local market for them. And then we integrated that into the existing direct mail tactics. So there was absolutely still mail as part of that campaign. I'm not sure if we'd necessarily describe the whole thing as digital first, but digital was like a very intentional component and definitely not an afterthought in this case. We led with some really great creative work. We had produced an incredibly moving film about an 8-year-old cancer survivor who had a baseball-sized tumor on her brain. And we took a film crew to her house. We met with her and her parents and interviewed them. We then went down to the hospital and interviewed her doctors. We put all of this together in a truly multi-channel campaign that had storytelling at its core, had a very sort of distributed this via a robust kind of paid ad strategy and connected TV streaming services, which, by the way, I saw yesterday, they're now scheduled to, or projected to overtake traditional television this year. That's streaming versus traditional. Add in a bunch of social media advertising, a much more robust email campaign, and then still have this direct mail piece. And the results of that effort was a 51% increase in their fundraising overall for the year-end period from those sources, and a 22% increase in gifts. So really kind of proved the point that when you get all these tactics working together in a really intentional effort, where digital is not just an afterthought, but a truly intentional part of the plan, it can work and have really amazing results.
Yeah, it's a great example, and I like the word that you used when you were describing it, that it really elevated everything. I think another piece that I wanted to mention before we move on to the next section is the difference between tactics and strategy. I think for those teams of one where you have to do everything, but also for some of those bigger teams that get hung up on details and process, the definitions of strategy and tactic can get a little murky. And so I always find myself coming back to this graphic a lot when I have to make sure I'm on the right track. I like it because it allows for, and in some ways encourages, uncertainty to exist within your strategy. It's James, you were talking about how you really want everything to be on a certain timeline in a certain way, and it's just not going to happen that way all the time, every time anymore. And so I really like that it sort of has you think about uncertainty that might come all around down the line. And the tactics that are the things that you're doing now, it all exists as part of that strategy, which is going to get you to that long-term vision that you've set up for your organization. And so, as a practical example, we did a webinar back in November on Giving Tuesday, and many organizations treat Giving Tuesday as a digital strategy, but in reality, your day of giving is just one tactic in your overall engagement strategy to secure dollars and donors. And so in the context of this graphic, it just reminds us to be flexible and responsive to what you're seeing on the ground.
Yeah. Before we jump in any further, I'm going to try to respond to some of the questions in the Q&A. So we'll try to get through some of those and then keep those coming. We'll probably do some more at the end. Thanks for these so far. So Lauren Willis asked, are the data stats to back this stuff up, the new world? How have you seen it impact fundraising, especially the dear friend versus personal? So two things on this. First, I would point you to, I don't have like stats I can reel off live on air, as it were, but I would point you towards some of the consumer research out there, which is definitely translatable and is just a little bit more robust than some of the fundraising research that's out of there. Maybe we're jumping from one thing to another and making some conclusions, but I think that's a pretty fair jump to make because there's no reason that the donors would expect to have a different experience from any kind of organization. In terms of the A/B tests, my recommendation for A/B tests is to always do those for your organization, learn from them, don't get too carried away by them, and don't get too carried away by everybody else's results. And they're very easy to do. It shouldn't really cost you any money. There's an opportunity cost perhaps that's marginal, I think, but always do these tests. I have oftentimes been quoted things from people like, well, we know that people respond better if you put a red BRE versus a yellow BRE because some organization did that once to a sample size of 500 people and they got, a 1% lift from the red BRE. Unless you really have the data around that, I'd be a little bit careful of interpreting other results that you hear about. Do your own A/B testing and see if it makes a difference. There's every chance, organizations are different, and there's every chance that what works in one place isn't going to always be the same for everybody else. So I think it's important to invest in your own. We always suggest doing A/B tests with any kind of mail, email campaigns we're doing. It's easy to do, and you can learn a lot from doing that. Tiffany asked if you have any recommendations for transitioning audiences used to receiving physical mailing versus digital. Yeah, so this can be tricky, but sorry about that. I just something fell off my desk. I truly believe that the biggest hurdle is likely to be internally, where there's often pushback from people saying, well, we shouldn't, people want to get stuff by mail, we shouldn't send them stuff by email. I just, again, test it, see what happens. Ask people if you like, do a survey and ask people, would you mind if instead of sending you this paper thing, we start sending you an electronic version because it's going to save the organization this much money. That's one way to come at it. The other thing is we just believe it's going to be a better experience and we want to meet your needs. Don't be afraid to ask people if somebody wants or needs some sort of paper version of anything that is, or if they're responding better to mail, then that's okay. Keep doing that if it's as your budget allows. But the most important thing is don't be held up by what people say internally about their sort of beliefs, which some of those may be real and some of them may be myths. Rich,
sorry, James, I was just going to say, and I think on the transitioning from mail to digital, I think if your budget allows, really digging into your data. If someone for the last 5, 7, 10 years has always responded via mail, then lead with mail. Send them mail. Don't stop sending them mail just because you want to switch to a digital communication. I think what you can look at it and say is, you send this person mailings for 5-10 years and they always give online, then maybe you don't send them all of your mail pieces. Instead of sending them two or three throughout the year, you just send them one. So you're still keeping your presence in their mail, but that they're going to probably respond online. And after you test it for a year or 2 or 3 or however long you want, see if it's working, and adjust and again, be flexible to how you're getting to that end goal.
And send email components before the mail components so that they have the opportunity to respond. I also want to say one thing. Sometimes people come at this question from the perspective of trying to save money. And I just think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think there's a world in which digital may be more affordable, maybe friendlier on the budget. I'm not sure I really buy into that for the most part. I think digital can kind of get expensive. The platforms cost money, the time costs money. I think do digital because it is better and allows you to create a more an experience that your donors are familiar with and want. Don't do it, and I mean, if you believe in that, right? Don't do it to save money, because if you're doing it to save money, maybe your organization, your donors aren't ready for that, and you're trying to force people away from a channel that they like and pushing them towards something they didn't ask for. So I don't think that's the right philosophy to do it as a cost saving measure. I think it's the right philosophy if you can prove and you can believe that it works for you and try things out and see what happens. And then we'll do a couple more questions really quickly. Rich asked about how do smaller nonprofits grow their email lists. So think about like old way versus new way. Just one real quick example. There's obviously a number of ways you could do this. Old way was buying lists. Still a lot of organizations that do that, and that's fine. One way for a smaller nonprofit to look at is you can do some really cost-effective lead generation campaigns through social media fundraising. We actually did a mini campaign with a fairly small nonprofit where it was a lead generation campaign where we generated close to 3,000 new leads, which all come in the form of email addresses. So they're all new people. I will say it's a 2-step process, and this is where something can get missed. You need to generate the lead, but you need to have a plan in place to follow up with that lead immediately. That person's raised their hand and said, I'm interested in what you're doing. I want to learn more. Respond, send them stuff, engage them. If you can generate 3,000 leads, you're not going to convert them all into donors. That's not what that means. You're going to convert some sort of percentage. And you only can convert any of them if you jump on that opportunity and start engaging with people, talking to them, trying to learn, like, what is it you're interested in? Treat them like an individual donor. And then one final thing, Chris asked, you mentioned a robust email campaign in your work with the Children's Hospital. Curious what that means. Okay, so I will say this. I perhaps overuse the word robust versus any other word in my vocabulary. I say it a lot. What I mean in this situation is, it was an email campaign that had, more detailed, more enhanced segmentation, probably 3 times the volume from what it previously had, and was just extremely intentional in the way it was structured and how it interacted with printed and mail components and the digital advertising components as well. So a not robust email program may have been 3 emails at the year-end period, without too much segmentation. This was sort of the opposite of that, like much more volume, much more segmentation, and we saw the results really go upwards as a result of that. All right, so we got to talk about donor experience, which is the second item on our list, and it's, I think, maybe the most exciting. It's where most of the opportunity lies, and I think we can summarize this by saying that digital tools and tactics can help us create a better donor experience, a donor experience that is mutually beneficial, that sparks joy. That's one of my mother's favorite phrases, and that ultimately drives long-term loyalty. It's beyond that sort of simple satisfaction and more about whether your donors feel connected to you as part of a community of supporters who feel like they are more than simply one side of a transaction. So the big question is, how are you creating an environment where your donor enjoys giving, and where they feel seen and they feel appreciated, where they want to keep on giving and giving more and more. And for this, I turn to the donor journey, or the fundraising funnel, as we have called it at BWF. Let me click through these little animations so you can see the whole thing. Sorry, I got two more. I forgot I had these on there. Okay. So yeah, the ACE model, where ACE is awareness, consideration, engagement. This is our representation of the donor journey. And in any annual giving program, you really want to be working towards this approach for how you communicate and interact with your donors. I'd argue that the digital tools make this easier to pull off, and it makes it easier to do it well. So your first step is to build awareness. And even if those of you tuning in from higher education institutions where you have alumni and you think, well, our alumni know who we are, they're already aware of us, get rid of that myth, dispel that myth. That's not what that means. Yes, they know you exist. Do they know what you stand for? Do they know what philanthropy can do? What their impact could be if they continue to be involved with you? That's what we're talking about with awareness. It's never done. There's always more work to do there. This is largely a content marketing strategy that educates people about your values. It's definitely not asking them for a gift. Don't lead with that. It's more about telling them who you are and what you stand for. I don't even think you need to talk about philanthropy early on. It's not about that yet. You can do this really effectively on social media. If you have email addresses for people and you're really sort of off to the races here, throw in some personalized microsites, and that can be a winning strategy. As your audience starts to become more engaged, we're going through the funnel, you'll lose some people, that's normal. We enter the consideration stage. This is where you want to start talking about philanthropy, because it's time to start connecting the dots for your donor to start seeing themselves as part of the equation and to understand that there's a role for them in this. There's a need and that they may be part of a solution. That's what the consideration stage is. So you need to tweak your messaging and start talking more about that. You're still not asking for the gift yet. You're making that connection between impact and giving. And then when the iron is hot, you strike, and we call this the engagement phase. This is when, if you're creating some sort of mid-level giving program, perhaps it's time to reach out and ask for that appointment. If you are doing a sort of direct marketing strategy, this is when you're going to ask for that gift. The thing is, these steps could happen in a very short amount of time, and it may be a few days. Honestly, it could be a day. And are you able to respond quickly enough to the donor's journey? You got to remember, it's not your journey, it's their journey, right? So you're on their timeline, and using digital tools are a way to effectively manage that just simply wouldn't be possible if you had like a mail-only campaign. So I would pay attention when you're on Facebook next time and look at the ads you get. Let's say you see like a little video for a product and it catches your attention. So you watch it, it's 15 seconds long, and you watch the whole thing. You don't do anything, you just watch that ad. Next time you go on Facebook, which let's be honest is probably 15 minutes later, you will likely either see the same ad again, or you'll see a different ad for the same product, but it gives you a little bit more detail, another step in the story. That's when you're being retargeted as part of a customer journey. And they're telling you about their product and they're making you curious about it. And any minute now, they're going to drop the gauntlet and tell you that you can save 50%, but only if you buy before midnight tonight. So you just went from zero awareness to ready to buy in a few hours. That can work in philanthropy too. Now, I'm not saying it always works like that. It doesn't. But I think there's a way that can work. And if you are not using a digital first strategy, then that's not going to work too. There was a question from Jillian around how long does a warming cycle need to last for a campaign? So the truthful answer is it lasts until the prospects are warm. How long should it last? How long can we make that last? Is in transactional campaigns where we're trying to get sort of base level participatory gifts, that can be less than a day. It could be a few days. It can be a short cycle. You're trying to get that gift. You can do that pretty effectively as long as you're doing some really, really solid audience targeting work there as well. If you're the opposite end of that spectrum, could be a digital warming campaign for a major gift outreach or mid-level outreach. We spend a lot of time working with organizations to build mid-level programs. Those outreach cadences are going to last much longer, those warming programs. Not months, I don't think. People don't have that long of an attention span, but it is going to be weeks at that point. We usually suggest starting out with some sort of 3 to 4 week schedule where people are seeing content consistently over that time and learning more and more about the values of your organization. And then in phase 2, the impact of your organization. And so maybe that's a few weeks, but again, I always would say it can be nuanced to the kind of organization you are. There's a surprising differences in how donors interact. And I would say that you're going to have to test and learn there and figure out what's going to work for you, but probably start with about a month if it's a mid-level program.
And James, I like the social example that you just gave. I think another example of implementing that journey is on our next slide. And you know, what I like about this journey is that it's one, multi-channel with email, social, personal outreach from a gift officer, but two, it has those contingencies built in to bring people back into the fold. And if anybody is familiar with Salesforce Marketing Cloud, this diagram will look very similar. But you know, when you don't respond to that first email, you get a reminder email that brings you back in. When you don't click on the second email, rather than getting a gift officer sending you a note, you get a text message and a final email taking one last attempt to try to keep you engaged. And so I really liked this sort of example of how you have that initial email that leads up to and has some different contingencies and branches depending on how the donor reacts, how it's their journey, not ours.
Knowing that we are 75% of the way through our conversation, this is how any client call I have goes, by the way. I have a lot to say. It's not a good thing. How do you create that right experience? I'll touch on this really quickly. I think this is fairly straightforward. I wanted to bring in some examples from outside the fundraising industry. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see I asked about this my followers a couple of weeks ago. A couple of experiences I love with some brands. With Virgin Atlantic, I was able to chat with them via WhatsApp to rebook flights, which was just such a enjoyable experience. Weirdly enough, I didn't have to sit on hold. They were very responsive. They were friendly. They sort of made jokes. They got all my flights figured out. They even added my baby daughter's ticket to that when she was just born. And so really helpful. That's a wow factor. All takes place in a digital space using WhatsApp. I don't think there's too many nonprofits out there that are using WhatsApp in that sort of two-way chat functionality. Stitch Fix, I've never been much of a shopping guy, never been one for going to the mall, going to the stores. Thought I'd give Stitch Fix a try. I have to say the thing I love about it is like the way it curates the clothing options for me, and I can browse through. There's a very slick experience on my phone. It's something I actually have enjoyed shopping for the first time ever in this sort of digital app environment. And then multiple people suggested Chewy, and I included that because it's not really a digital example, but I would argue that Chewy is a digital first company. I don't believe there are any Chewy brick and mortar stores. Could be wrong about that. I believe it's an online only company. Certainly that's how I know about it. And the whole idea is that you order your dog food, your cat food. And so it's a digital company, but they do some really neat things in their multi-channel approach where some are kind of sad if you have a pet that passes away, but other things that somebody mentioned that they got a painting of their dog, I think for a birthday or something, mailed to them. So again, digital first company that's always been a digital first company, adding some non-digital elements for their multi-channel campaign. This can work both ways. So I wanted to share those. There's lots of examples of this in the industry as well. I think things to think about are, are you creating a good online giving experience? If you want to be digital first, have you removed the friction? Is it easy to give? One of our colleagues, Carl Otto, posted a screenshot on LinkedIn earlier today, actually just an hour ago, when he was sort of ranting about he was trying to make a gift to an organization and it asked for his billing address and then his shipping address, even though he checked a box saying it was the same thing. It's just annoying to have to do that. And how many people are you losing because you're not making it easy to give? You need to prioritize a frictionless online giving experience. I love donor portals. University of Chicago has a really great one. Many more examples about this starting to come out. This is one of the things that a lot of more people are getting involved with. What Chicago's does, which is neat, is it allows you to sort of share some of your interests, and then it curates content based on what you're interested in. And then it actually also learns from what you're clicking on as well. So the organization's collecting data as well that's useful to them in figuring out what you're interested in. Also wanted to share a bad example, and I won't name any names here, but I gave to an organization a few months ago. a nominal gift. It was not an organization I've ever had an affiliation with before. Gave, I think, $25 or $50. Got a series of really nice touch points, some nice thank you videos, a few emails. Then I started getting a whole bunch of mail pieces. I got a mail thank you note, I got a mail solicitation letter, and then I got a very lengthy printed, nice, slick donor impact report. And I gave like $25. So somebody asked earlier about how do we transition people from print to digital. Well, maybe that is a challenge. I'm not sure we should be transitioning people from digital to print, unless you really believe that's the way to go. And maybe it is. Maybe they felt that I had the capacity to be a long-term donor. And so they can see how it might work. But in this particular situation, I felt like that was probably wasting their money, and they could have invested that time in creating that really good digital experience, which they started off with really well. So a lot of things to think about in the experience space, but we're going to have to jump into audience, and I'll pass back to Jeff.
Yeah, you have a lot of people on the call now checking their donor database to make sure that wasn't you. That you're not in there. So we've been talking a lot about how to build a digital first program, the tools you need, the skills and expertise, the experience you're trying to create for your donors. I think a key benefit of building a digital first program is what you get out of it. There is just a ton of information that you just wouldn't get in a traditional program. You know, insights like you have no idea if the mailer you send out is opened or goes into the trash. But with a digital first program, you have analytics and insights into, are they opening your email? Are they clicking on the email, the links? You can use social listening tools to track reach and engagement on social media. You can analyze web traffic and see how the ads you place are performing in real time. Online giving forms can record demographic and affinity information. The challenge is how to digest and interpret all of this data into a usable format. And I forget who asked the question earlier, but is there data to back it up? This slide is part of that data. It shows that what donors are expecting is that you take all of that information that you collect, because they know you are and they expect you to. How are you taking that and using it to deliver a more catered, maybe that's the wrong word for it, but a more curated or inclusive experience? And with this level of insight and information into individual constituents, it really allows you to take that step beyond personalization and segmentation to being responsive to your constituents. And a digital first program and mindset allows you to do that at scale. It's now possible with some of the tools that we've talked about, with that mindset that we've talked about, to deliver relevant information and authentic content to your audience at exactly the right time. It finally gets you to that $100,000 donor experience for the $100 or even $10 donor. And we have this conversation with many of our clients and colleagues across the industry. And I think that one of the common threads through all of these conversations is a worry that you're not going to do it right. I think one of the key takeaways from my perspective, especially with audiences, there isn't one right answer or right way to build an audience. The key is being nimble enough to be responsive and find the best way to engage authentically with your audience. That's what these numbers on the screen tell me, that your audience wants you to know them, and a digital first mindset can get you there, which is maybe a perfect segue to our final section, which is message.
Yeah, so I think message may be the most simplistic part of the equation for today's discussion. It certainly gets more tactical, but it's super important as well. So don't want this to get overlooked. Simply put, you need to adapt your message to the platform, and this means both your copy and other content forms, whether that's video and images, need to be optimized for the platform you're using. So let's start with writing. There's nothing that says copy and emails needs to be short, unless you've done an A/B test and that you have found that to work for you. For the most part, there's data out there that shows that length is not that much of the issue. It's more about copy being interesting, compelling, getting people's attention. There's going to be some sort of ideal length for sure, but don't be fooled into thinking that just because it's an email, it needs to be short. I was always taught to embrace the scroll, so that's how I approach this. It's more about how is the copy presented? Is it in bite-sized chunks? Is it easy to read? Is the font size big enough in email? Is one of those things that actually is probably more important than how much copy do you have. See over and over again emails that are just incredibly short and don't really have any message to them at all. It's just a real quick sort of almost like a little reminder email. I think digital allows more room for urgency. You know, it's easier because the donor can respond with urgency. It's not as impactful if you get a letter that says like, you know, our organization is going to shut down if we don't hear from you by midnight tonight, and the donor's like, oh, I better write my check and walk it over to the mailbox. Like, not quite the same thing. So definitely think about the ways you can use urgency and deadlines in your work when it's digital. We talk a lot about personalization, definitely something we should strive for, but something that's actually, you know, perhaps more important is relevancy. Maybe it's the same thing, but personally, it's easy to personalize things by saying, Dear Jeff, at the beginning of your email. That's great. Relevancy is what matters. If I say, Dear Jeff, I wanted to tell you about our horse farm that you can make a gift to, and Jeff never ridden a horse and is afraid of horses, maybe that's not relevant. That's not the right thing to talk to him about. So relevancy is more important than personalization. Also making sure that you have a through line for your storytelling so that all of these channels are working together, essentially telling the same story, singing from the same hymn sheet, if you like. Use visual storytelling more and more. I will say this, if no matter how much video you are doing, I would almost guarantee you're not doing enough. Video is an incredibly effective tool. It doesn't have to be highly produced. It can be very authentic. It can be, you know, shot on iPhones, or I guess even an Android if you like, that kind of thing. But, you know, video is critically important. There's a way for this to work into whatever your campaign is. Get that on your website in a place. Get that out via email, on your social ads, all of that stuff. Video is great. You don't have to spend a lot of money on it. You certainly can spend a lot of money on it, but you need to be doing more video no matter how much you're already doing. I think we should, in the last couple minutes here, just kind of review some of our key takeaways. Obviously, we have these on the screen for you to see, but ultimately, we're going to bounce back and forth on these, Jeff. So number one is to staff your program with individuals who bring a digital-first mindset, and find partners, invest in professional development and find partners who add to your bench strength and fill in those gaps.
You'll need a toolkit, but the most important thing to get right is a solid foundation of data. Be multi-channel. Don't use digital as a backup. Stick with it, allow it to grow, give it time, and be responsive and meet donors where they are.
You create an environment where your donors love you, where digital provides so many opportunities to do that. An environment where you're fostering long-term relationships with donors.
Segmentation, personalization, it's more than just personal data. Really understanding the relationship in both directions. What relationship do you want to have with your donors, they with you, and understand the interests and motivations of your donors. Digital doesn't just make it easier to do things and be more relevant, it gives you no excuse not to do it.
And finally, create content for your platform specifically. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. You need to articulate your value proposition every step of the way, just as you would in your really great print campaigns. Digital allows you to be more relevant and more personal than ever. We didn't get to answer every single question. We didn't really get a chance to open it up for bigger questions. So what I will say is, if you have questions, feel free to send us an email. Our emails are on the screen here, jbarnett@bwf.com and ghallett@bwf.com. Also, find us on LinkedIn. We love to connect via LinkedIn. If you really just want to have some time, by all means, go to our Calendly link there and you can schedule 30 minutes and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have or talk things in more detail. Would love to get your feedback on today's session. It helps us improve and get better. We like to learn too. So please scan that QR code if you like to do that kind of thing and get to a little survey to give some feedback. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Jeff, for joining me. And thanks to everyone for tuning in, and we hope to connect with you soon.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And the link to the survey is also in the chat if your phone is not handy.
Thanks for that.